Evening for the launch of a book that we've all been really excited to finally see, Hungry Beat, and really pleased that we have the three authors here tonight. So I'm just going to run along in a line. This is Neil Cooper over from Edinburgh. Douglas MacIntyre, Straven. Grant McPhee.
Where are you from, Grant?
I'm really happy that we've got Nicola Meighan's going to host this conversation part of the evening. Thank you.
And I'm from Stirling, right, which deserves a cheer. Always deserves a cheer. Where are you from, Grant?
From Paddington.
There you go. Right, okay, so it's a geographical spread. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? It doesn't feel like Tuesday, is it?
It's Tuesday.
Right, your Tuesday night with us here in Mono by the wonderful monorail. It's amazing to see so many of you. It feels like it's the weekend just because it got so lively in here, which is absolutely awesome. My name is Nicola Meighan. I'm a music journalist and broadcaster. Before I did that, I worked in London for many years for Mute Records, which I absolutely loved, but sadly it was decades before the post-punk golden years of this book and all that is celebrated within it. The book is, and I'm going to give you the whole title, Hungry Beat, the Scottish independent pop underground movement, 1977 to 1984. It documents life-changing Scottish labels, especially Fast Product and Postcard, but there are more in there. And its co-writers are the awesome countercultural insurgents beside me. We're going to hear about them again because I think it's very, very important that we celebrate them. The work that they have put into this is absolutely immense. So yes, they are musician and Creeping Bent label instigator Douglas MacIntyre. He's going to be on the stage playing music later as well. It's going to be amazing. Filmmaker Grant McPhee, whose work includes Scottish pop landmarks, Teenage Superstars, and Big Old Dream. Have you seen them? We're going to talk about them. They're amazing. And my erstwhile Herald colleague, journalist, arts critic, and post-punk chronicler, Neil Cooper. Please give them a warm welcome. Just to quickly tell you how the event's going to work, and I better actually check my phone at this point because I have no idea what time it is. Right, it's 8:20. Are we still going to talk for about an hour? Is that about the timing?
If it gets boring after half an hour, we'll decide.
It's never going to get boring. We could be till 3 a.m. Yeah, we're going to try and talk for about an hour as long as that's okay with you guys. I would say that I think it's the feeling very much is that we'll chat about the book up here. Douglas, Grant and Neil are more than happy to chat to you about anything that you might want to ask them afterwards, but we'll focus on blethering between ourselves for now, and the reason for that is predominantly that afterwards you're going to be treated to some absolutely incredible music from the Hungry Beat group. Douglas might tell you a little bit more about what's going to happen there. Is that a surprise, Douglas?
It's a surprise, wrapped up in an enigma.
It's going to be absolutely awesome. I heard a little bit of a sound check earlier and I was nearly crying. This isn't a band that's going to be playing, although I feel like we maybe look like we could have been signed to some sort of earcon, I don't know. Do you think Bob Lass might have been impressed with us at some point?
I think you would have described us as meta.
We're totally meta, right? Absolutely. So listen, just to start with, the book kicks off with the excellently termed Year Xerox. Okay, and an Edinburgh gig on the Clash's White Riot tour with the Slits and the Subway Sect. But give us a sense, and we'll just start at the left. I feel a bit like Cilla Black and Blind Date here. With your own Year Xerox, was there a gig, Neil Cooper, a conversation, a record, an artefact where you began to see the light vis-a-vis everything that is within this book? What started it for you?
Well, I suppose it was kind of a misspent youth reading the music papers and stuff. And initially, in 77, being just that tad too young to be able to go to gigs. And I think my first gig was a Rock Against Racism gig in 1978 with in Walton Hall Park in Liverpool with a band called Dead Birds. Wow. Which featured Wayne Hussey.
Oh, really? The Mission?
Oh. And but in the context of this, I mean, my first paid gig was seeing Joy Division at Eric's at an under-18s matinee gig in 1979. But with the context of this, it wasn't until 1981 because me and my mates, we got into the whole kind of postcard and fast product thing. You know, in Liverpool there was Zoo going on, in Manchester was Factory, so there was, you know, there was a lot to read about and absorb. And then it was seeing Orange Juice, I think, in August 1981 at a club in Liverpool called Plato's Ballroom, which was actually a kind of old chicken in a basket cabaret club called Mr. Pickwick's. But on Wednesday nights, once a month, it became Plato's Ballroom. And that was when it was the kind of four-piece lineup for the first, the postcard era Orange Juice. And it was also the first gigs that night of the Wild Swans and the Pale Fountains,
wow, really?
which kind of, you know, up until that point, it felt things were kind of very kind of dark and long overcoats. Everyone was looking like it would be living in the 1930s. But with that gig, everything seemed to brighten in a way. There was a wit there and a cheek, and things were more kind of pastoral, I think, and it was okay to be a smart arse.
It was okay to be a smart arse. I love that everything seemed to brighten as well. I think that's something we might go back to. Douglas?
I guess the records that really excited me from the punk era, I mean, like everyone else, I liked the Clash's first album and the Sex Pistols singles, etc. But it was hearing like the Subway Sect sessions on John Peel and the Slits sessions on John Peel, the Prefects, so all of that kind of stuff. And that did seem to, that really excited me and really resonated with me. I thought I could play guitar like that. And, you know, I felt, well, I want to start a band like that. And it was really exciting. Probably the biggest disappointment I had during that period actually was there was twice I was meant to go and see the Buzzcocks, and because I lived away out in Straven, I couldn't. It was difficult to get in. Occasionally got a run in, but I couldn't get to those gigs for some reason, and I missed Subway Sect, who were the support group one time, and Joy Division were the support group the next time.
So you could have seen them.
So I missed it.
Do you think sometimes it's actually as powerful a thing to miss a gig like that and to absolutely maybe never go over the possibilities of it, but to deliberate on them, right? That has a kind of talismanic power all of its own.
Well, I think with Vic Goddard in particular, there's just something in my life that felt really talismanic about him. And, you know, I do remember I was working, I was doing some labouring for my uncle at a building company, and it was horrible. It was somewhere in Stewarton in the middle of Ayrshire. It was freezing, it was cold. But the NME, and Vic Goddard was on the front cover. And that was like, I was reading the NME, my hands were falling off, I was having to drill stuff into a wall. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, I need to change my life. Really? So Vic was a big thing in terms of an influence. And I think the fact that I missed those gigs, it became quite mysterious. And Vic obviously, for various reasons, moved out of making records for a good number of years. So he always held that mystique and mystery. And then obviously I started playing in groups with Vic, you know, and I got to know him really well. And he's still got that mystique and mystery about him. He's just an incredibly, I mean, it's almost like he's like a mix between some existentialist and Norman Wisdom. So I think sometimes if you miss something, it makes you want to, you want to dig deeper because it's something you've missed.
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of contradiction in a personality or a persona or an ideology is at the heart of so much I think we'll probably end up speaking about tonight. Now, Grant, you came at it from a slightly different perspective. Was there a moment at which you actively decided or realised that this sort of underground of Scottish pop music, because it is pop, was what was utterly something you wanted to uncover and celebrate and document?
Yeah, absolutely. It probably would have been around about 2004. I saw a fantastic film called Made in Sheffield, and it's about the Sheffield bands. And I thought, well, I could make a film like that about Scotland.
And it hadn't been done, which is wild,
which
right?
was, it blew my mind. And, at that time, it was like early years of my filmmaking career. I was working with Manny, who was in Wynn, and doing music videos for him. And he just one day asked me what I'd like to do. And that just popped into my head. And he said, well, I know Malcolm Ross. And, I was like, obviously
It's
knew
casual.
who Malcolm was, And he just said, right, I'm going to phone him right now. And, normally if he'd given me his number, I would have sort of backed out. And before I knew it, I was in a cafe with Malcolm. And, I knew about Postcard, obviously, and Orange Juice, and I said Cameron Joseph Kay. When I started speaking to Malcolm, he said, have you heard of this band called The Scars? And it's like, no. And then he's like mentioning all these other bands. And it quickly dawned on me that there was this other music scene that I knew nothing about. And I thought, well, if it's interesting to me, it's going to be interesting to other people from my generation. And the more I delved into it, the more fascinating it became. And I knew, obviously, of Joy Division and New Order, who were my favourite bands at that time. But the fact, I knew they had the Earcom 12-inch that was on like Fast, but I had no idea that was like from a flat in Edinburgh. It just like blew my mind that this happened, just like a few streets from where I was living at the time. And I quickly arranged an interview with Malcolm, and it was just the more I found out, the more there was to find out.
And it's also the proximity in one way, but also the fact that a story like this hadn't been explored when the bands are so fascinating on a local level, but that was almost never what it was about. It was the fact that these were artists who went on to have utterly huge impact. So you have, along with the Scars, and the sort of progenitors for a lot of artists who we came to understand and know when they became a bit more successful, for want of a better term. But when you've got artists like Aztec Camera, Orange Juice, Joseph Kay, the Human League, it's incredible that the story hadn't been told. But I guess as a filmmaker, that's what you're always looking for.
No, absolutely. And, it's just the more, as I said, the more you delved into it, the more amazing the story became. Because, I eventually knew that Being Boyland was on like Fast, but then finding out that Bob Lass was their manager, and Joe Callis like coming into it, and he was like grew up in Fife, and just the way that everything connected, and it just felt like there was this amazing timeline from something happening in a flat to having in 1981 like Dare, like the biggest album certainly in the UK and #1 in America at the time.
At Christmas.
I know,
like at a time when like people first of all go insane, and also sales are through the roof. And there it is.
Absolutely. And it's just it sold 9 to 10 million copies, and that starting in a flat in Edinburgh, it was like fascinating. I just couldn't understand how this wasn't in like the books that I was reading. It's like looking back, there's like things in Rip It Up, Simon Reynolds' fantastic book, but it just seemed to be sort of like footnotes. I couldn't understand why this wasn't.
It's almost a chapter in Simon. It's a brilliant book.
Why this wasn't of like extreme significant importance to everyone, and I just wanted to get that out.
Yeah, and those voices. So before we delve into the music and the labels in a little bit more detail, let's just talk about briefly the practicalities, right? Because this is like an absolute tome. It's incredible. Wait a minute, just a quick piece of housekeeping. It's going to be available for you to get your hands on Friday.
The 7-inch single edition, yes, on Friday. I think the books themselves are available now.
But because there's of the vinyl sort of backlog at the moment, there's been a slight delay on that, but it's worth the wait, honestly. But also, again, let's just start, just because you're at one end, and then we'll just kind of come along. Can you tell us how you managed to wrangle like so many bands? We've touched on some of them, but you've also got the Bluebells, you've got touching on the Dead Kennedys, you've got everything, you've got theatre, literature, politics, all these ideologies. You have so many incredible voices in this. How on earth did the three of you come together and wrangle this into one cohesive body of work? Because it is. It sort of tells a million stories, but it also tells a really important story in itself.
Well, I think this is Douglas's story, really. I mean, it was Douglas. It was a kind of done deal before I was asked to be involved, and the deal with White Rabbit was already there, and then they brought me in later. I mean, the bulk of it is taken from the interviews that Grant did, and then I was asked to come in, do some new interviews, and a few other things that aren't immediately apparent from probably reading it, but it's like, and then we just kind of went from there. I mean, once I got involved and we worked it out, it was like there'd be days where we'd be contacting each other constantly, and then weeks where everyone would just do their own thing, and then you just kind of forget anyone else was doing something. But and then occasionally you just pool it together, and it was like, okay, and if someone finished something, then fire it over, and then that would like spark something else off. But I mean, it's kind of Douglas is the kind of drive behind it all.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was being a band with the three of us, because we were all contributing to it. Obviously, the raw material was all from Grant's film. I mean, he had countless hours of amazing interviews. And probably the books that I really liked that were telling an oral history would be like John Savage's book, England's Dreaming. And I really like, there's a Clinton Hayton one called From the Velvets to the Voidoids. And I just like that idea of trying to have a narrative where it was the musicians, the artists, you know, telling their own stories or telling their stories in their own words, rather than a journalist imposing those words on them. So I had to kind of try and sculpt that, obviously, but there's a natural flow to it because it's chronological. So, the three of us were just bunkered down and we kind of pulled the whole thing together. And the thing that was quite amazing when we started it off, there was, I think I had there was a couple of chapters, and we sent one off to White Rabbit. Largely, Stephen Pastel, as he has done for decades, has been so supportive and helpful of countless different cultural movements. And Stephen suggested to me, you should send this to White Rabbit. And I knew of White Rabbit, but to me, White Rabbit would be like signed to Factory or something. You know, I just thought they were amazing. So we sent it down, and Lee got back and said, look, I love this exactly the way it is. You should follow this pathway onwards. And so once we had that in place, it kind of gave us a massive amount of impetus, because we knew that there would be a book coming out, and they liked the way that we were trying to do the book. So, we just kind of, like I say, it was like being in a band and making an album. Yeah. It was really creative and energetic. Yeah, it has got that collective spirit to it, and energy to it as well, Grant, from the perspective of someone who had to go through, and the film is awesome, and there is so much in it, and there is so much between the lines as well, if you like, but to revisit it for this must have been like a brilliant project as well, because you're excavating your own work in these stories as much as, but there's layer upon layer being added as well.
Yeah, it's very strange to read it, because the film that we started, Big Old Dream, was edited by Angela Slavin, who did, she put everything together, and, we only had a 90-minute film, and there's probably, without the music, 40 minutes of interviews in there, so it's expanding that, and, I thought we could use that as a start off, so it's just like a different medium, what you can see in an image on screen with somebody giving it a little known look or something doesn't translate onto the page, and it's really down to Douglas revisiting these interviews. We had some interviews. The Bob's one was about 4.5 hours, and we've got 10 minutes of them on screen. So to revisit that, I think it's fascinating for me to read it, because it feels like a very different book. It's a different take on the same story, which I think is great, because that's what I think it should all be.
Bob Lass would very much approve of that, because it's a remix of the story.
Absolutely.
And no one didn't love pulling things apart and putting them back together than Bob Lass. Before we get into the joy of upturning stereotypes in Glasgow through postcard records and giving bits of orange peel a catalogue number in Edinburgh, which, to this day, did anyone get one of those? Does anyone have the orange peel with a Fast Product catalogue number on it?
Quality of life.
No one I have to fight in this room then. I'm still looking. It'll happen eventually. Let's talk about the title of the book, because the time period that's covered, 77 to 84, to all intents and purposes, could be termed post-punk in some ways. I mean, historically it is. But if there's one thing that is shared by Bob Last and Hilary Morrison's Fast Product and the other iterations of that, and Alan Horne, let's say, and Edwyn Collins's Postcard, it's the fact that for all the differing ideologies and love of postmodernism and politics and the possibilities of music, they both, at their heart, absolutely believed in the power and the reach of pop music, didn't they? That was really very important to them. It wasn't about staying in the undergrounds.
No, it was. Once they decided that, particularly with Bob, I suspect it was a big strategy. They had ambition from the start. Postcard Postcard Records of Scotland, based on the whole Motown ideal. Fast Product from the start, not just getting local bands from down the road in, but bringing it in and reinventing those bands to a kind of almost self-destructive degree, particularly with the Human League.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell this story again because there was an event, like obviously the Human League started off with their first 2 singles with Fast Product, and then signed to Virgin, and Dare happened, and it became the biggest thing in the world. But the split, Martin Were from the Human League, and then Heaven 17, said it was the ultimate betrayal. But and that was kind of engineered by Bob Last and Virgin Records, but Martin Were took part in a book event in Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago, to publicise his memoir of that, and there's a bit in it that's about the split. And there's a whole dialogue between Martin and the meeting where Martin is told about the split. And but Bob Last was there. Bob Last was there, so they got Bob up to read his part from 40 years ago of how he told Martin Were that he had to leave the band. And it was still it was a well. Was it? I can't remember if it was Ronnie Gere who said it, who was chairing the event, or whether someone else said it. But it was like the 21st century version of the flexi disc of the Human League's Dignity of Labour EP, which was a flexi disc recording of the band talking with Bob about what to put on the flexi disc. So we're getting into whole meta-ness again. But beyond that, there was this huge ambition going on from the start, which tapped into, I don't know, a political thing, of what was going on in the 80s, just a social thing as well. It was about, that's where the hunger comes from, the hungry beat. It's about wanting to transcend that quite often working class route and to become successful. Yeah. And some people did that, some people didn't.
Do you think also from a musician's perspective, so you're saying, Douglas, that it galvanised you to say, right, okay, I'll just pick up a guitar, or I can do this, I want to be a part of this, I want to be part of this conversation in some shape or form. The fact that there was this label in Edinburgh, Fast Product, and then later in Glasgow with Postcard, but they weren't local labels per se, they were international labels. They absolutely, they actively sought out. Postcard had the go-betweens, obviously, coming over from Australia. Fast didn't even put out a record from an Edinburgh band until kind of 3 or 4 kind of, releases down. They went to Sheffield, they went to Leeds, they had the Meicons, they wanted, Gang of 4 other artists. Do you think, from a musician's perspective as well, that was something that was interesting because it made the possibilities of what you were doing feel like it was on a, not necessarily a bigger stage, but that the people you could reach were everywhere and not just round the corner?
Yeah, I think there's a very outward aesthetic with Fast Product. I think as I was learning the guitar and trying to get a band together, which eventually I did, the big inspiration for me was Adultery, actually, and Horror Show. So although I admired the fact that Fast had released records out with Edinburgh, when they actually signed an Edinburgh band, it was massive for me. Because whilst it was great to see loads of Scottish bands were getting attention, like the Simple Minds and the Skids, it probably was the Scars that really spoke directly to me. I mean, I just loved everything about that. And they've never sounded as good as the records Bob Last produced with them. So that was massive, and used to, I think because we were so disconnected and kind of gauche, rural boys, we just became besotted with the idea of the Scars. So we used to go and see them all the time. And then we saw Joseph Kay, and our affections kind of switched to Joseph Kay. But having the Scars on Fast Product, having an Edinburgh band on that label was massive. And then obviously, Postcard came along, and that was another amazing explosion,
Yeah, exactly. When you were uncovering all of this and going back in time and finding these bands, were there any that you particularly hadn't come across? Grant, you knew of some of them, but not all, who, were almost like mind-blowing for you, whether that's in attitude, sound, maybe you saw some footage, maybe you just read something, because sometimes looking back, it's not necessarily that I've been at the gig, but there's just something, it might even just be a quote, and it just rips everything apart again.
Absolutely. The Scars, after Malcolm mentioned to me, definitely the first single on Fast Product, but I think overall, it was really the attitude. For me, as Douglas and Neil have said, uncovering that a record could be truly independent and be successful, because in the 60s you had things like Island and Immediate and Track, and they were all getting distributed by major labels. And it took, I think, like Mute with New Life and Depeche Mode, I think that was the first record that properly independently got into the charts. So finding out about like the Cartel and that you could do things yourself, I think, to me, it was incredibly liberating, that DIY attitude that you actually could do something and be successful and you don't have to compromise. That's what I, finding all of that out. The Cartel is a fascinating thing. That's like a completely new story that hasn't been told, and it should be one day. But for me, it's just that attitude that, said that somebody in a flat in Edinburgh could, I think they would probably choose the words like mastermind, but eventually get, a number one album in America, essentially from a little flat.
Yeah, the Cure Street.
Yeah,
it's impressive.
And for anyone, it's like something that should inspire them, not just in music, but for me, for filmmaking, it's fantastic.
Anything is possible.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
That resonates even now. You're mentioning the Cartel. This is interesting. So Rough Trade, obviously, starts as a record shop, becomes a label around about 78, but the received wisdom is that pretty much Fast is just getting in there first, is putting out the first records, is leading the way, even just in terms of design. But there's another brilliant, I guess, parallel between Fast Product and Postcard that emerges within the book. Neil, you can maybe tell us a bit about it. And it's the fact that, in actual fact, both Fast Product and later Postcard are turned down by Jeff Travis, who was running the distribution and the label and everything of Rough Trade, for sort of different reasons. One end of the spectrum, the records weren't good enough. At the other end of the spectrum, they were too polished, right? They couldn't win up here.
Well, I mean, that's the embrace the contradictions. Exactly. I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, it's just about the ideas of that and what do you do. But I mean, that spirit of slightly hippie-ish idea of DIY that Rough Trade had, and then all these other that network of things like Zoo and Factory and bring that. There was just something in the air, I think, and then to be turned down because it's the worst record.
This is the Meicons. Is this like the very first Fast release, right? Jeff Travis is like, too bad.
Yeah, and it's like, but I mean, with Postcard as well. I mean, I think the first Orange Juice album was supposed to come out.
Orange Juice, Joseph Kate, and go between 3 singles, right? Alan Horne takes some and he says, "Nah, too polished." Yeah. It's like,
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, but but he was going to do the Orange Juice album, I think. But am I wrong about that?
But you spoke to Jeff Travis for the book, so there are some updated sort of conversations. And
yes.
Jeff now reflects that perhaps he was a bit harsh.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I think he probably remembers it a bit differently from Bob and other people. But I think in the end, it seemed like a good idea. But I don't think he was into the kind of conceptualism that kind of went with it.
Yeah.
I think he found, I mean, given everything that Rough Trade had come, where they probably, like Marky Smith said about Rough Trade, like you get the T-Boy, everything was done collectively, and it was like, and all of that idea. But Jeff didn't seem that into the conceptualism in retrospect.
I'm interested in some of the perceived differences between the sound of young Edinburgh and the sound of young Glasgow that emerge in the book. Perhaps you can take us back, Douglas, and let us know if this was something that you were aware of or that you can reflect on now. The Bluebells' Ken McCluskey says at one point, I think maybe the groups were a bit darker in Edinburgh, more menacing. While the excellent actor and former Dirty Reds Tam Dean Byrne says later in the book, we looked on Glasgow with a bit of disdain, really. They were just sort of floppy, which is very charming. Do you think there was an element of Postcard and Orange Juice actively railing against the stereotype that was completely perpetuated in Glasgow at the time, this no mean city idea? You know, do you think in actual fact they relished the fact that this is not what they wanted to be? And do you think that impacted on the music? That was, Neil used the word brighter earlier when he spoke about Orange Juice, and that struck me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is it. It just felt like somebody had turned the colour television on. I knew of Orange Juice's first single because it was recorded in Straven, and I live in Straven. So the guy that owned the studio was a really lovely old gentleman called John McClarty, and he was a tailor to trade who decided to dabble in making records with country and western groups. And so he recorded the first Orange Juice single, and he gave me the poster for Falling and Laughing. So that was the first I'd ever heard of Orange Juice. And Mr. McClarty was like, here you go. He gave it to me, and that to me was as important as anything. I just thought, that looks new. It looks different from what's been happening in the East Coast. So it was that typical thing of getting you had to get the bus into Hamilton, then get the train in, and I went and bought Falling and Laughing, and then when I heard it, it just sounded totally different. It felt like this is a new thing. And, and that subsequently continued, obviously, with other Orange Juice singles. And I suppose Joseph Gay were a counterpoint to that. But it just felt there was a whole new thing happening in Glasgow that was different from what had happened in Edinburgh with Fast Product.
Yeah, can I just come back? I mean, I think you mentioning the no mean city thing, I think it hits it on the head. I mean, before that, in the 70s, in cities like Glasgow, Liverpool and Manchester, which were really run down and rough, and there was a lot of violence, and then you get these clever kids doing something that is completely against that, and it kind of feminizes a sound, I guess. It's not afraid to be fey or whatever, and I think it's almost like trying to get out of the city in a way. And it's interesting, you're from a rural background and we're coming at it from the other way, but the inner cities were dark and dangerous places. Edinburgh as well. I mean, I know people think it's dead posh, and it's got its posh bits obviously, but you see footage in Grant's film at the start and it's really miserable. And like there was just a real, I suppose people were trying to change their own landscape or reinvent their own landscape.
I mean, I saw Orange Juice for the first time in the Bungalow Bar,
Paisley.
and Paisley, and it was I couldn't quite believe it because it was very song orientated, really funny, really humorous. Edwyn was wearing a sailor's top, which itself you would get your head kicked in for doing that in Straven, never mind Glasgow, or Paisley. So it just felt, well, what's this? And the songs were all great songs, really melodic. It was going back to the skill of songwriting, I think, and obviously very eloquent lyricists, super intelligent, but just making something that was quite magical. I knew it felt like this is a new music, and it did feel that Postcard became so influential, I think, in Glasgow with me and all my pals that ended up in bands. I mean, everybody loved it because it was great.
Yeah. And not just bands. So there's lovely stories of Robert Hodgins, we'll give him his Sunday name, Bobby Bluebell, has a fanzine, and that fanzine has writers and photographers who then go on to, have NME covers and document the kind of sound of young Scotland. So it has this snowball effect, but there's also an aspect of going back a little bit. And Grant, I'm wondering from your perspective, the fact that you could take someone like the Buzzcocks Spiral Scratch EP, which is probably a collective point at which the Edinburgh bands and the Glasgow bands maybe take something from it, but it's absolutely an ideological and musical jumping off point. It's never anything about replicating or finding a template. It's just like absolutely blow that up now and take it in a completely different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I think, looking back on it, it is a sense of trying something new and different. I think that really comes across. And I think even though orange juice, punk is often not seen as the sort of year zero. I think the fact that orange juice was doing something that had a 60s sound to it is like new in itself, and very different from like the 3-chord like thrash of whatever like punk bands were still hanging around.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to add to that.
The other thing is that it was never really just about that type of music. So you've got something like Bob Lass, who I think right through it, Parliament was almost like his template. He didn't want, even when the Human League, so of course a band that he first signed to Fast, then managed, then engineered to sort of split into the Human League and Heaven 17, and Joe Callis from the Rosillos gets involved, who Bob tour managed and then managed, and Don't You Want Me comes out, and in the book I think he's still quoted as saying, I think that was a hit because I could still hear Parliament in there somewhere, He just still has this sort of resonance that he wants to bring to the masses.
Well, Davy Henderson used to, from the Fire Engines, used to hang around, obviously with all the musicians, they all used to hang around at the Fast Product flat, and Davy said Parliament were never off. Parliament funkadelic the whole time. That was it.
Yeah.
And that's quite different from the records that were getting played in Postcard. So, I think the Edinburgh thing to me always felt like it was moving forward, and it was looking to the future. To a certain extent, what made Orange Juice attractive was you could see a bit of Love and Spoonful, a bit of the Birds, or whoever. You could see how it was. You could see where it was coming from.
Even a 50s aesthetic, visually, they kind of tapped into that as well.
But it reinvented the music in its own image as well. It took those influences from the Birds and everything, and took it into G12.
Yeah, exactly. There's a real, I would say, filmic quality to the book as well, and it's the way in which you take us into two flats. So there are venues that are so important within it. There are, of course, record shops which are vital to the story, but there are these two flats. There's one in Edinburgh and there's one in Glasgow. And we perhaps know a bit about Westminster Street and the Postcard Records flat. I knew a little bit less about the Fast Product flat in Keir Street, but you paint a picture and you take us into both of those. And Grant, from a filmmaker's point of view, what was that like? Because the words just absolutely lure us in. I feel like I've sat at that kitchen table and had some of the veggie curries and maybe contributed to something that was written there.
From a filmmaker's perspective, it's terrible, because what we want is like footage and photos, and we don't have it.
Yeah, infuriating.
But we have a few, and just to bring in Hilary, and then just to go back on what you're saying, it wasn't just about Bob. With Fast Product, Hilary had like a massive influence, and bringing all those like Edinburgh bands to there. I think as Douglas mentioned, or Neil, like Bob, I think Bob had like 2 records, and it was Hilary who was really the music fan who brought all these bands in. I think she's just an incredibly important person who's like quite often missed out, I think, unfairly.
I love the fact that Hilary is has plenty to say in this book. I would love to read more from her and hear more from her, but I also love that what she says, you realise the impact that she had, not just on the design or the aesthetic or the music, but, for example, she kind of says, Joy Division at one point wanted to put out something on Fast, and she kind of went, I wasn't entirely convinced by the name, I thought that was ideologically questionable, I wasn't having it, right? So I think more than anything, this kind of says what impetus she had within this structure, if you like.
Absolutely, and I think she's like key in that flat. It's like, the reason I mentioned her, other than wanting to make that point, is like, she was the photographer for Fast. All the photos of all the bands at that period were taken by her, and she's like a fantastic photographer. And I think within the flat, maybe Bob came up with the conceptual ideas, but the actual hands-on stuff, finding the bands, telling Bob this is a good band, I think it was down to her. And it's a very different dynamic in that flat than what was in the Postcard, where I think it very much was.
And the Keir Street flat was Hilary's flat. She had the lease when she was a student nurse, and because the university bought up that street and wanted to knock it down and turn it into some kind of super complex. But the council knocked it back and turned it down. So they sold it on to a housing association, and it was cheap rents, and Hilary went into all that. And then that's, but having it right next door to the College of Art, the symbolism behind that as well, I think is really important.
But when you then hear about this flat and the fact that, you know, David Henderson speaks beautifully about it, you know, really quite nostalgically. I don't expect he's like a hugely nostalgic guy, but he's very, very affectionate about the impact of just sitting around that table and being in that space and having those ideas. And the kitchen table, even at the heart of it, does seem like quite a domestic setting, but of course it was absolutely all going off with him, wasn't it, Douglas?
I think what was interesting with, you know, because Davey's not really nostalgic at all, but obviously I think when Grant spoke to him, he was very, very complimentary, I think, about what was happening in that flat. And they were so encouraging of really young people. And I think they recognised something in, you know, Davey and the fire engines, and also with the scars, you know, I mean, you know, and encouraged them to be involved in the process. And it's almost like debunking the idea of, you know, well, there's a Scottish Arts Council, that's real art. They were just like, you know, anybody can do art, just do your own art. And that kind of was, I think, you know, obviously a really kind of socialist idea, let's just do art, or let's make things up. I mean, if Davey shows me, I also play in the sexual objects with Davey Henderson, if he shows me a song, it's like, he never talks about, it's like, I just made this up. If he shows me about artwork, I made this. You know, it's not like, you know, it's kind of like a worker mentality, you know.
I think that's one of the things you cover within the book is the idea of there's never like one answer, there's not an answer at all, but there are lots of perhaps reasons, and a lot of them are just to do with work. So the questions and the ideas of the fire engines doing these infamous 15-minute sets where, okay, so at one end of the spectrum, you've got the kind of Warholian idea of the 15 minutes of fame, but I mean, that was almost an afterthought. It was actually because they maybe didn't have that many songs at that point, or one of the other things, again, to go back to Joy Division, is they were saying, you know, Joy Division, they'd play for like an hour and a half, and we didn't want to, there's a quote, we didn't want to wreck people's nights. I just love that, like, totally modest approach. We'll just try 15 minutes, short, sharp shock, and off again. It's not always instantly the statement that it seems to be. We make it that.
And I mean, there was that, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience went to see the fire engines played, I can't remember the venue, it was up in Sauchiehall Street, and it was the fire engines and orange juice. And it was incredible. So fire engines, 15 minutes off, back on for another 15 minutes. And orange juice were imperial at that point. They were, I don't know if it was round about Poor Old Soul or something like that, but you just felt these are the two most important bands in the world. That's what it felt like to the audience. It was incredible. And they were all so young. That was amazing.
Exactly.
The last time Fire Engines reformed was at Leith Theatre at a Noiriki night, and they did the 15-minute sets either side of Lydia Lunch, doing a set in the middle. But, you know, it's in the book as well. I mean, Paul Morley interviewing Jerry Garcia from The Grateful Dead. You know, you do 15-minute guitar solos, Fire Engines do 15-minute sets. Discuss.
Discuss, exactly. There's room for both. There are so many incredible memories and anecdotes, and records and philosophies. Why did you want to cover this particular period? I can understand why it starts in 77. Okay, that's kind of the beginning of where we go. You finish it in 84. You could finish it a year later because there is so much in there. You could have covered a month and it would have been a phenomenal book. I would argue it could also come right up to this day. I don't know how many of us would be in this, you know, room without hearing those records, or I don't know what we do, but even Monorail, Stephen Pastel's involvement with this, I used to work in that record shop, like it has had such a profound effect that it could stop today, or the book could keep going. Curtailing it in 84, maybe this goes back to your sort of documentation, Grant. Why was that? It needs to be contained, right, at some point.
Yeah, and, you know, we also have to make a story out of it
and
as well.
And a film that has an ending.
Yeah. And, you know, it's not just, you know, it's not just a book. The film, like Douglas did, you know, about 25 other interviews as well. So it's not just, you know, from Big Gone Dreamin', this was like a new way to do it. But it feels like, you know, Swamplands, the successor, was happening around then. And it's when a lot of the bands, you know, for me, the sort of two ideologies of that you can make it completely independently, and there's nothing wrong with being like big and famous and successful, is completely accepted. And then when the big record labels started to get into that and making their own independent labels, and I think, you know, there's a lot of confusion. It just felt like it was like a nice, to me anyway, a clean point to finish it off. You know, that part of the story, which we wanted to tell you, for me, the exciting part, finished there. And obviously there's like, you know, a whole different story that can start would be another book. But it'd be interesting to hear like both of your views, like why you thought 1984/85 years was going on.
Yeah, I think it was just it felt like it was the end of the independent aspect of both of those labels, because obviously Bob Last then taking the Human League to #1, and I think throughout the story things start changing. So you've got, you know, your Altered Images, for example, being a Glasgow band, and then signing to a major label. So that was amazing, right? So someone's on a major label, and then there's reality of how that works. It means they get wages.
Yeah.
So Edwyn's on the front cover of the NME going to sign on, and the guy behind the counter shows him the NME and cuts off his dole money.
That's right.
You know, so the reality of signing to a major
Harsh truth.
was, you know, something that was quite important. And then you see the story, if you look at each of the individual groups, you know, you could write stories about each group. I mean, Altered Images, 3 albums, they're all different. They started having hits. So they were from that scene, and suddenly they're massive. And then, you know, there were, and you know, Grant mentioned there.
I do love it. I'm not throwing it away on purpose. Thank you, Grant.
Yeah, Grant mentioned there was the, you know, Swamplands, and you think of the, you know, James King and the Lone Wolves are. Everybody knows how amazing they are, right? They've always been consistently amazing. And you thought, well, that's going to happen, because now there's a label there to maybe sustain it through London Records. And Memphis, James Kirk, genius, and Paul Quinn, an incredible singer. But for various reasons, it obviously didn't happen. And Win, I mean, you've got the power. I mean, why wasn't that a massive #1 single? But, you know, so stories don't always pan out the way they should, you know, and I think we finished it there because it just felt like, almost like that was an epilogue. It was kind of like the end of the independent part of the story, really, and just showing how the labels, or the personnel within the labels moved on to majors and started trying to play the major label game, which is a pretty horrible game, you know, it's just not the same thing.
But I also love, Neil, the fact that it makes it feel like it's an ongoing conversation.
Well, it's a
continuum.
continuum.
And that feels important as well, exactly.
Yeah, it's a continuum. And I think, you know, the way it bookends 77 to 84, for me, that period was the most exploratory. I mean, coming at it from as a teenager, going in to listen to it and go and see it, you know, you could see bands, we spoke about this last week, you know, you can see bands trying funk, trying jazz, but not really having the chops to be able to do it yet. You know, but so it comes out, inverted commas, wrong, and that becomes a different kind of aesthetic, and you know, something wonderful comes out of that. But 84, in my mind anyway, that was kind of, historically now, what we think of as the 1980s and all these clip shows that you get on telly, that was the year zero of that, in a way. It was glossy,
MTV
technology was changing,
Yeah,
Thatcherism was horrible, and it was all money, the big labels like sloshing money around, and you know, lots of bands who came up from that time, you know, going so far but being dropped and all of that kind of thing. So it just marked a thing. But then what was going on in the background was that continuum. That people were, you know, I mean, Davy Henderson going from the Fire Engines to Win was audacious enough, but then kind of stripping things back to the Nectarine #9 and going on to the Sexual Objects. It's like, you know, that's a really, really interesting set of dots to join up. You know?
Yeah, the energy changes, but it absolutely is still there, isn't it? And the dynamic might change, but it's absolutely still there. One of the other things is how powerful you know, it's not about competition as such, but the fact that, for example, you know, Zoo starts in Liverpool kind of because Manchester's got Factory, or Postcard, there's a brilliant quote, in fact, because obviously Fast Product is established and that's going great, and Alan Horne's quoted in the book. It's a historical quote, but it's great. I think it says so much about the man, his outlook and his humour. He says, "I would love Postcard to be the level of a Fast Product or a Factory, to have that kind of power. Although I think both of these labels have been pathetic." It's just so Alan Horne, right? It's acknowledging the fact that you almost need that energy it's maybe not envy, but people have to be doing things to make you want to do them. It's just important that happens everywhere in towns and cities and labels and fanzines, musicians, whatever. It's vital, isn't it? And so Postcard, it's wild to think it maybe wouldn't have happened without a Fast product, but...
Yeah, but I mean, negative energy is really positive, if
Yeah,
that's not a terrible oxymoron.
It's
But that's
true,
like,
yeah.
you need something to rail against, you know. And I think also with, you know, with Alan and Orange Juice, it was very much everything else is rubbish except us. But everybody should be like that, because you should be, you know, I mean, you get older, you grow up, but at that particular point, you're really trying to make your mark. And part of what defines you is what you're not. And sometimes, I mean, it's very childish looking back at some of these quotes in retrospect, but they were funny at the time, and they were probably a defence mechanism to a certain extent. But, you know, you look at the bands that sort of, that, you know, I guess came in the wake of particularly Orange Juice, I suppose the Bluebells being a good example. And, you know, the thing that, you know, the press went crazy about the Bluebells, and the reason was they had brilliant songs, for a start. They looked great. They looked Postcard. It was almost like, this Postcard thing, what's it all about? The Bluebells, this could be massive. It's like the Monkees, or great songwriting, you know. So I think, you know, and then of course, you know, that doesn't go down too well within the camp, because, you know, it's Bluebells are doing better than Orange Juice or whatever. So, but that's all important. Part of that friction is what makes something happen, you know.
You have to remember, at that time, music was a matter of life and death.
Totally.
You know,
Still
and
is.
you know, it's like everybody hates each other.
And it's all played out in the papers that everyone reads at the time, right? It's all played out in the NME or in Melody.
It's a
Maker
relatively small world in the
Yeah.
way that it isn't, you know, okay, you know, social media now, you can have pop spats and that sort of thing. But it was all played out in zines and like local scenes, and like, you know, you know, Ian McCulloch's in that bar and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know...
Or just the power of a record shop, you know, of just like kind of pouring over record sleeves.
Absolutely.
And the number of people who met, and you'll find that when you're interviewing them, how many of them say, yeah, I'd kind of seen them at such and such in Coburn Street, or, you know, Hot Wax. Everyone meets in very, very sort of confined spaces. So you have the import of community as well is vital.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. And I think it was very tribal at that time, and that's, you know, places where you could see people who are part of your tribe. But also, you know, just going back to the 1984 cut-off, it's like, by no means, when you think like good music finished, you know, there's all
No,
of,
not at all.
you know, what came after, and in a lot of ways, what's been made now is the best music like Scotland's made. It really is, because they have everything that happened before in front of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Spotify.
Neil, when did you come up to Scotland? Did you come up to Scotland
84.
as a student? Right, okay,
84.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I wondered what the landscape was like when you came up, because you never left.
Well, I mean, you know, I
And we're not letting go of you now.
I lived in Glasgow for a year before I moved to Edinburgh, and, you know, I thought it would, like, when I came up, it would be paved with Orange Juice and Postcard records, but it wasn't. It was still a little bit of a scary place. You know, that's why I jumped ship to Edinburgh. But yeah, I mean, and you just, you find, well, one of the things, it didn't seem, because when you're not part of a scene and come into it and you don't really know where anything is, you don't know where the record shop is, and that took a while to find.
Yeah.
And like before, like, but, you know, once you start going out, and you know, that is, like you say, you go to a record shop, that's where the posters were, that's where, like, the interesting people hung out, and that's where you got your gig tickets. Whereas now it's all done online, and that sense of community maybe isn't there. So, and then gradually, yeah. So, I mean, it was quite rough at parts, but also the buses were orange and the underground was orange, so it seemed that brightness.
It's
again,
very
I suppose.
fitting, yeah, exactly. Neil's experiences reminded me, Douglas, of the Go-Betweens recollections in the book about coming over to write, but they didn't actually write much because they just watched Orange Juice playing a lot in Joseph Kay, I think. But also, Alan Horne didn't really let them go and see any other bands, right? He was very restrictive about their Glasgow experience.
Well, Robert Forster's I interviewed Robert, and he was like, he wasn't allowed to like certain bands, so and he wasn't allowed to see other Glasgow bands.
Yeah.
But I think you take the go-betweens had prior to coming to Glasgow for a short period of time to record their single for Postcard, they'd been travelling around, and I think they just found Glasgow, that microcosm of the West End at that point. It's different from the way it is now, but I think they found that it was incredible. They thought it was like Bohemia, you know.
But again, that's just testament to the fact that both Fast and Postcard had that international outlook. So it was like, yeah, wait a minute, we want an Australian band, or what we don't just want to have, or even we want an Edinburgh band, right? They wanted Joseph Kay as well. It was never about just looking inwardly at what was
No,
on your
absolutely.
doorstep.
I think, what's the point of just playing locally? You want this to go out to as many people as possible. Why would, other than play local gigs?
Yeah, exactly. Looking back now on the stories, the voice of Hilary Morrison is much more prominent, which is amazing and absolutely vital. There are some other really key women. When you were, first of all, working on the film, it feels like you still need to dig deeper, and Hilary is quoted within the book, and I think, I'm not sure if she mentioned the film, but certainly the book is saying, it was a man's game still, right? She takes the Meekon single, interestingly, down to Jeff Travis and Rough Trade and gets short shrift. She was in The Flowers and other bands and felt very much like she was the only woman at that point. She eventually teamed up with one of the Ets. Twin sets were there, but it's a really, really masculine landscape still at this point, isn't it?
No, it is, and it's one of the rightful criticisms of, because why so many male bands were all women, but at the time it's like we didn't want to tokenize anyone by just including somebody, and that is what it was like. There's some fantastic female, the Twin Sets are a great band, and like Rachel Gray are fantastic. They didn't have a proper single out at the time, and it's interesting. How did you find it, like seeing live bands at the time? What live bands?
But I was in like Riot Girl, so I was in like Riot Girl time, so it would kind of by that point it was like one extreme or the other, so you couldn't almost move because there was like a total reaction against that, if you like. But it's fascinating realising that not that far before that, you have this, a completely different scenario. And one of the things I loved was you're hearing about Bobby Bluebell's fanzine, 10 Commandments, and Kirsty MacNeil. Now, I didn't really know about Kirsty MacNeil, and I'm appalled. So not only did she write the cover story, kind of absolutely singing the praises of the sound of Young Scotland and NME, I think it was, but also Bobby had her and Robert Sharp as a photographer kind of doing this team. And it's like, she's documenting all this. It's absolutely vital, but I feel like this redresses some of that at least, and does try and find these other voices and give credit, because it's so easy otherwise, isn't it, just to go with the names we know.
Well, I think if we think about, I suppose female artists in Glasgow, Sophisticated Boom Boom.
Oh, totally,
I know obviously there was the other groups that Grant mentioned there in Edinburgh. The fact that Sophisticated Boom Boom...
And Strawberry Switchblade, we should say, absolutely mentioned and quoted. Totally,
But, Strawberry Switchblade... Sophisticated Boom Boom never got to release a record, really.
Exactly.
Which is weird. They did the Peel sessions, but nobody signed them. And, they were popular. I remember going and seeing them a lot. But things did change quite quickly, because by the time, the C86 thing happened, you'd have, obviously I have to say the absolutely wonderful Fizz Bombs.
Absolutely, yes.
My wife was the singer in the Fizz Bombs. But you had the Fizz Bombs, and you had Shop Assistants, So it had changed. Something changed because these bands started releasing records. Again, Stephen...
Pastels, exactly.
The Pastels. So things did change, but it just felt like, even at the time, I was like, why is nobody signing... Sophisticated Boom Boom, and it took ages for Strawberry Switchblade to get records out, and it took Zoo Records to start making that move.
Yeah, so it wasn't actually even the kind of Scottish label, so you still have that. But there does seem like there's a bit of an element within the book to kind of try and find those voices a bit, and that's something that it could easily not be there, and it's absolutely.
Let's not forget Faye 5.
Vital. Faye
Yeah, of
5
course.
is almost the starting point, right, in many ways. And so, but it's this fascinating thing as well, because even Faye 5 saying like, oh, I wasn't sure, you know, in the early days I wasn't sure what I was doing, and she just comes across as being so absolutely in command of everything. So you get a different insight into people as well, right? Even Davy Henderson's like, oh, I don't know what to do, so that's why we never played any chords. You know, I thought that was like an ideological, absolute decision. There was a lot of just...
But there was like making it up because it felt new.
exactly.
And I mean, you know, the fire engines. You listen to fire engines, you can hear bits of the contortions, bits of the fall. But it's all of the pop group. But you could take all that stuff and you mash it together, and you're probably trying to copy some of these records. But because of your, you know, probably your limited musical ability, for want of a better term, you create something that's completely new, and it's incredible, you know. So yeah, I think, you know, it's kind of like, to me, you know, the fire engines were like, you know, like the Slits, but the Slits when they did their John Peel sessions, because that was just wildly anarchic. And when I heard the fire engines, I had that same feeling of total lack of control in the recordings. It was just pure excitement, total energy.
And there's just so much wonderful stuff about all of these bands within the book. I've just seen that the hour is up, by the way, so this is me attempting to wrap up in a succinct way, which is very difficult for me. But yeah, there's so much about all of these artists. I'm thinking about even the way in which the Fire Engines released albums. Were they the remixes? What were they? It's all in it. There's tons in it. I believe you can get the, as I say, limited version with the 7-inch on Friday. In the meantime, you're in for an absolute treat. Douglas, do you want to say anything about the band now, or are you going to introduce them once they're on the stage?
I'll introduce them now, probably.
Okay. It's not us, though. It's okay.
It's not us. That's the good news. We'll have a wee break, and anybody wants to come and chat to any of us, we're more than happy to do that after we've done the next set of songs. We're going to do a short set of
15 minutes.
15 minutes. That's exactly. So we're going to do a short 15-minute set of some songs from that kind of period. And we'll have Malcolm Ross on guitar. Woo! Woo! Yep. And Campbell Owens on bass. Woo! And we'll have some guest vocalists as well.
Woo! They're going to be great.
That's the secret part of it.
And Douglas MacIntyre on guitar.
Exactly, and Douglas MacIntyre. In the meantime, thank you so much, Neil, Douglas, Grant McPhee, Hungry Beats. Thank you.
Thank you.
There we go. We better get our scores, huh?
We were due to have Ken McCluskey from the Bluebells singing with us. He's a wee bit under the weather, so he couldn't make it. So we've got some guest vocalists coming up to help us out. So first of all, we have, from the Fizz Bombs and the Secret Goldfish, my wife, Katie.
Hello. Do my best to fill Ken's shoes.
And Katie and I playing the Secret Goldfish along with James Kirk.
Who's not here?
Who's not here. And this is one of his songs. It's called Felicity.
Felicity, oh, oh, oh. behind the scenes, which says where he is. Whoa, the clarity of my eyes shines my way of memories of past victories, fine scenes of shining white, publicity, whoa, 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 publicity, whoa, 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 publicity, whoa, 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 publicity, whoa, whoa, whoa. Happiness, whoa, whoa, happiness, whoa, happiness. This is the sound of happiness. Felicity, whoa, whoa, whoa. Felicity, whoa, whoa, whoa. Felicity, whoa, whoa, whoa. Felicity, whoa, whoa, whoa. Thank you.
Ross, can you put my guitar up a wee bit, please? On stage. Thank you. Okay, this is a song which is a big favourite of mine. It's called It's Kinda Funny by Joseph K. 1, 2, 3, 4.
But the passage of time can change anything, like the feelings we find. So I'll disappear through the crack in the wall, and the memories I leave will mean nothing at all. It's kind of funny. it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. Whoa, 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 it's kind of funny.
Thanks very much, Katie. And as if by magic, the tambourine player is Monica Queen. And we're going to do a fire engine song. The song that Bob last produced and Davey and the rest of the guys hated, but that most other people love. It's called Candy Skin. Okay. Like the back of my hand. This was a breakthrough hit, I believe. After a couple of singles on Postcard, Aztec Camera moved to Rough Trade and released Highland, Hard Rain. So, yeah, this was a great record. I remember the first time I saw Aztec Camera playing this song, blew my tiny mind, Campbell. Isn't hard. Right, okay.
Right. So this is what it sounds like when girls sing it. So it belongs to us tonight, girls.
Thank you very much, Monica. Back to tambourine for some, which will be required in this song. If we could invite Mr. Robert Hodgins on stage. It was love.
Can I just say one thing, right? I'm here to replace Ken McCluskey, and you're going to find out why in a second. You're going to find out why I'm not the singer in the Bluebells anymore, you know? Now, Ken's a great singer, man. Can I just say a couple of things, right? It's great to see Colin here. I really loved it when the guys mentioned James King. I want people to realise, before there was a postcard scene, there was a Glasgow scene, and it's really always kind of like forgotten, you know, like I did 5 fanzines before I mentioned Orange Juice, so that just shows you the depth of musicality in Glasgow and Edinburgh, to be fair too, man, you know, so let's keep all that in perspective while I ruin it.
East Kilbride too, of course.
Anyway, this song, This song, I met Alan Horne, he goes, Hodgie, he goes, you want to be the Monkees? Write a Monkees song. So I did, and he goes, all right, I'll put you out on the label, right? But he didn't. That's Alan Horne, exactly. We signed to a major.
I think that I might be blind not to see through your life, not to see through you. Everybody, somebody, everybody, somebody, everybody, somebody's fool. Something good in your way, something good and true. Everybody, somebody, everybody, somebody, everybody, somebody's fool. Somebody's fool. Somebody's fool. Somebody's fool, but I won't be yours. Not for us.
Song, right? Could you see, right? Have you ever met Edwyn Collins in 1981, 80? I would say, right? I met Edwyn Collins outside Listen on St Vincent Street with Alan Horne. I had a fanzine called 10 Commandments, and from that day on, I probably saw him every day for 2 years. Edwyn gave me his guitar. He gave me everything you could possibly hope for from anybody to ask. And Alan, to be fair, right? So, let me just say, right, everything you hear about Edwyn Collins in this book is true. I've got to hold this because it keeps falling off. Okay, it's going to get a little bit messy now because we're going to do a song that. This next song's for Barry Rainbow from Mogwai, by the way. So, can I just tell you something, right? Barry from Mogwai used to be in a boy band, right? When I first met him, he was in a boy band, right? And I'm talking boy band, I'm talking. You asked for it, pal. Okay. All right. Barry, come up and sing.
This is the great unreleased. Is that what we have? Yeah.
What goes on in your mind? I think that I'm falling down. 1 minute one, 1 minute two. I'm about 1 minute down. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll be alright. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll work alright. I'm gonna fly from side to side, from the compass string to see the bell up in the sky. From the compass string to, baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll be alright, be alright. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll work alright. I'm going up, I'm going down, I'm gonna fly from side to side. What goes on here in your mind? Nothing that I'm upside down. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll be alright. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll work alright. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll be alright. Be alright. Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll work alright. Last time, right? Baby, be good, do what you should. You know it'll be alright. Guys, bonus, feel good book. Right, congratulations.
Okay, thank you very much for coming along. Thanks to Malcolm, Robert, Monica,
Campbell, Katie, and everybody else that was here, the panel, and thanks to all of you for coming. Very much appreciated. Thank you.